Oh hi there, I got 182 subscribers since my second video, and today I'll craft a puzzle diorama with a magic wand box. And for that I bought this very special material. Well, it's just a piece of wood, but hear me out. This is walnut wood, and there are several reasons why I chose this. The first reason is that in the well-documented lore of magic wands in Harry Potter, walnut wood signifies knowledge and intelligence, and that's essentially what I'm going for here in this diorama. The second reason is that I wanted the wand box to be slim and slender, and wood like balsa wood or basswood would simply not cut it. Problem is, walnut is a hardwood and it's not that easy to cut. But it's not impossible, and with a bit of effort, I'm able to cut some pieces out of it. Now typically when you're doing carpentry, you would want to screw in the joints or use some dowels to connect the two pieces. But obviously I can't use screws or nails here, so I made my own tiny little dowels out of jewelry wires that I cut into short little pieces. I'll then take one side of the wand box, and using a drill I will make two tiny holes for that impromptu nail to go into. Using a bit of PVA glue, or carpenter's glue as you might want to call it, I'll gently join the two pieces together. I'll then repeat the same process for the other edges as well, and then glue the whole thing together. Once the four sides of the box has been glued and dried, I'll apply a layer of PVA glue on the bottom so that I can glue the bottom slab into the box. And this is where I was pretty happy that I chose a hardwood, because walnut being a hardwood, it didn't warp or bend and maintained its shape. With that done, I'll leave it for a few hours to dry. Once the glue dries, I'll sand off the excess glue, and I'll get to do what every carpenter wants to do, which is to stain the wood. To stain my walnut wand box, I chose boiled linseed oil as my stain. This is a very traditional and old technique of staining wood. This is not a varnish, it's literally just oil. And to apply this is even simpler. You just take a paper towel, dip it into the boiled linseed oil, and then spread it across the wooden box. It's as simple as that. The downside to this, however, is that I have to leave it to dry for maybe a few days, perhaps even a couple of weeks. And that's why I started the build with this wooden box. After applying several coats of linseed oil, I'll wipe off the excess oil and continue the build. So what about my wand? Aha, well, it's this one. Now sure, it doesn't look anything like a wand, but then again, I never let it go, just like a wizard wouldn't let go of his or her wand. And I take care of it just like an obsessed wizard waxing their wand every night. So yeah, should be alright. It's just that I couldn't think of a diorama to put a magic wand box in.
I wonder.
Until I remembered the very first crafting suggestion on this channel from Roy Alice 100, who kindly suggested that I should build a Ravenclaw house. And I thought, what better way to put away a secret wand box than in the house filled with riddles and mysteries, the Ravenclaw Common Room. For this diorama, I decided to go with this section of the Ravenclaw Common Room. I won't be crafting the ceiling or the front portion, and instead just the floor, but I also make sure that I'll stretch it out so that I can fit some sort of a puzzle mechanism in it. And don't worry, I'll try not to reveal too much of the puzzle here, so that by the end of the video you might try to get to solve it. To start things off, I've picked up some recycled foam core boards, and I'll make a knife stand out of it. This has got nothing to do with the diorama. I just thought that this being the last diorama for my precision knife, I thought it deserved a good view of the diorama. Now the House of Ravenclaw is situated at a tower, which means that the floor is circular. But as I mentioned earlier, I want to fit some sort of a puzzle in it, so I will stretch out the floor. I'll then dethrone my precision knife from its throne and then cut out the delicate circular dials. These circular dials are essentially a part of the puzzle, and they have to be really circular. To make sure of that, I'll try a test fit and see if they work. Now that I know they fit, I'll scribble out some of the stone designs onto the circular discs, which is essentially the same design as every other diorama we have done before, because I don't know, I didn't make the game. Anyway, to those that are new to this channel, what I'm doing here isn't simply drawing patterns. I'm also applying a decent amount of pressure on the pen so that I created some sort of indentation on the foam core board to give it some sort of a texture, which is to say it's a very laborious task. But after some time, I'm finally done with all of it. Or so I thought. After scribbling so many lines that make my fingers go numb, this is how the final pattern looks like. And before I give it a paint job, I'll scribble on some secret text, which hopefully you are familiar with. Once that's done, I'll give it a paint job outdoors with a bit of blue and light grey color to hopefully make it look a bit more interesting. Once the paint dries, I'll make two tiny little incisions here and here. These holes are also part of the puzzle and I want them to have a nice glowing color. For that, I'll be using UV resin, so I'll seal up the holes using polymer clay and then pour in the UV resin. I'll then blast it mercilessly with my massive UV lamp. Once the UV resin has cured, I'll peel off the polymer clay. The results turned out to be okay, so I can now proceed to stick the LED lights. And here I decided to go with blue LED lights. That's because Ravenclaw is all about blue color, so blue. Now my intention here is that these lights will serve as beacons for my puzzle, and with lights come switches. To operate these LEDs, I will make some custom switches. For that, I'll be using these bolts, but the threads of the bolts might get in the way, so I will cover it with some polymer clay and then bake it. Now I don't want to give away too much information on how the puzzle works, but what I can tell you is that these operate using magnets and gravity. And here is a demo of how the switches work. There's two of these gravity switches, but one of them has a secondary function to it, which is to serve as a locking pin, which will essentially lock in the magic wand box. Now to make my combination key, I'll cut out circular discs using PVC plastic and then drill holes through each of them. After that, I'll cut out tiny strips of aluminium tape and then stick them across the circular disc. This essentially operates like a switch because they would start conducting electricity when they all line up. And finally, I'll top it off by sticking a tiny wire on the top. With those components completed, I've cut out the baseboard and I'll stick some crafting paper on it. This will help create some sort of space and function almost like a casket. I'll then insert this hollow circular tube on the base and finally stack all of these circular plates on this tube. This will serve as a shaft for all of the discs to rotate around. Once that's done, I'll be using this glue, which is really popular in the jewelry crafting world. And I really like this glue, it's just that it's extremely difficult to squeeze the contents out of. The nozzle is simply too small and it's such a pain to use. But unfortunately, there's no better glue than 𝚜𝚌𝚘𝚘 for this case. Now that looks like something out of Indiana Jones. That's probably what you're thinking right now, but you're wrong. Why? Because, you know, this is, I don't know, never mind. Anyway, now that the glue has dried, I'll shove the whole thing onto the floor and glue it together. And since all of the dials seem to be working properly, I'll cut off the excess plastic shaft and start gluing on the bottom. At this point, I've also decided that I'll shove the magic wand box onto some sort of a cave structure beneath the common room. And to create the cave or cavern looking shape, I'll just cut out some squiggly lines onto a foam core board and then stick them onto the floor. With that done, I'll complete the connections, tidy up the cables, and then stick the power source. With the bottom sections now completed, I can start working on the wall. And for the walls, I thought of working on it section by section, and I'll start off from the center. Now the walls here are rather straightforward and there's nothing really to write home about, so instead of a pen I'll be using a sculpting tool to create the details on the wall. I'll then carve the window frames onto the foam core board and then stick some of the stone skirts for the wall. Once that's done, I'll start working using clay to form the window frame. Now at this point, everything was going according to plan. I'll just have to create these window frames, let it dry, and continue to make more window frames. Until this happened. You see, once I had let the clay dry, I noticed these tiny little cracks appearing on the window frame. And this stirred up something within me that I tried to keep repressed, and that is my desire to make post-apocalyptic, nature-overtaken structures. And so I gave in. Once I had properly destroyed the floor I've spent hours making, I'll make the remaining parts of the window frame using ABS plastic. I'll then glue these pieces gently onto the window frame, or at least what's left of it. Once that's done, I'll glue them onto the floorboard. So my idea has changed, and now I want to make the whole structure look like a floating island, with grasses and nature growing about everywhere. And to create that effect, I will be using clay just like I did in my first 𝚜𝚅𝚅 diorama. I'll be using some XPS foam here, and I actually don't like to work using XPS foam, and the only reason I'm using it here now is to bulk it up a bit so that I can save a little bit on using clay. Really, there's no other reason besides that. To make the earthy cliffs for my Ravenclaw Common Room, I thought of going back to the Monte Mart air drying clay, but for some reason it was a bit pouty today and I couldn't get it to work, so instead I bought half a kilo of DAS clay, and this was so much easier to work with. The process is essentially the same as I did with my 𝚜𝚅𝚅 diorama. I'll scratch up the surface so that the clay can bind to it better, supposedly, okay, because I don't know if it actually makes a difference. And one of the things I wanted to do better with my 𝚜𝚅𝚅 diorama was to make the earthy texture much more realistic. And I tried to do different variations of techniques of brush strokes to try and imitate what it looks like in real life. The first idea I thought about is using brush strokes that would press down or push up, and this way it looked like it pushed the clay together, making ripples across the texture, and I thought it looked pretty realistic. I also chose a front-facing section of the wall here and tried to make a chunky, rocky cliff here. I thought adding this might make it look a bit more interesting and less boring. And remember the floors I cut out before? I hadn't thrown it away just yet, so I'll stick them on the side, just barely hanging on, and I think this might come out looking rather interesting. But as I continued working on the cliffside, something didn't feel right. I mean, it looks okay, but it also looks fake at the same time, if that makes sense. I browsed the internet for tutorials and I've tried several techniques, but nothing seemed to work. Until it dawned on me that what's missing is water erosion. Specifically the one we call in engineering rills. Now rills are formed by surface runoff water and they can be tiny little streams, but these are temporary and mostly carves out small little streams on soil. And that's exactly what I was missing, because after I made some scribbly, squiggly lines across the cliff, the whole cliff simply popped off and I was really satisfied with it. At least that's what I think. Well, you can be the judge of that. After applying my newfound revelation, the cliff is now completed. Once the clay has dried, I'll start the paint process. For the paint, I decided to use several layers of either grey, brown, several dark shadows, and then finish it off with some dry soil highlights. But as you can see here, the paintbrush leaves tiny little specks of paint, and I know that this happens when the user doesn't use the trigger properly. I've even tried cleaning the whole needle and straightening it and all of that, but this happens even with a clean needle and a clean nozzle. So let me demonstrate it a bit. These specks of paint happen mostly when I try to spray very fine details. And there's another problem with the airbrush where when I try to spray the paint, it tends to turn the paints on and off even though I've never let go of the trigger. It constantly keeps sputtering. You can notice this even more if I try to make a tiny little straight line. So if you're watching this and if you know something about airbrush, please let me know who's wrong here. Is it me that lacks experience and I'm making mistakes using the airbrush, or do I need to go out and buy a new airbrush? If you have an idea on a good budget airbrush, please let me know down in the comments below as well. Anyway, since I can't get the desired effect from my airbrush, I'll be using a simple brush and apply all the paint. Here I'm trying to do some brown washes to bring out the shadows more, but it didn't really look good enough. So instead I'll go through every small streams individually and create the shadows myself. Once the paint dries, I will apply swatches of green color here and there, hoping to make it look like some sort of algae or moss growing on it. As for the giant stone cliff here, the idea is essentially the same as well. With that done, I'll also bleed some of the paint onto the stone floor because I'll be applying some overgrown vegetation on this surface. Now let's start working on the decorative parts, starting with this banner in the middle. To make this curtain, I'll be using this paper which looks like parchment, but it's not parchment. What I'm trying to say is I have no idea what it's called. I'll cut it into the desired shape and using the cardboard that I used in my greenhouse build, I will stick them onto the cardboard. I'll give it a proper deep blue paint which is reminiscent of the Ravenclaw Common Room. And then using the straight edge of a sacrificial paper, I'll make the outlines of the curtain. Once that's done, I'll sketch out the figure of what appears to be a raven stuck on the poster. I'll then use a transparent ruler and create some of the patterns that's behind the logo. With that done, I'll finally paint the stretched out raven on the curtain. To make the curtain rods, I'll be using the same jewelry wire as I did for my wooden box. I'll then stick these tiny little blue beads onto the ends of the curtain rod. Once the glue dries, I will stick them onto the curtain. There's a lot of carpets inside the common room, but I'll make just one of it. The process is essentially the same and there's absolutely no way that I will get the pattern of the carpet correct, so I'll just improv and do whatever I want here. Just like that, I will stick them onto the diorama. Alright, now let's work on the furniture, and I'll sculpt them out using polymer clay. Since I'm very new to sculpting, I thought I would take this opportunity to practice sculpting. I don't think I can tackle characters or humanoid figures, but I can start on this non-living objects. My idea with the furniture is that I'll build all the parts in sections, and I'll be using a technique I learned in engineering called orthographic projection. It's essentially a fancy way of saying that I will draw each pieces from side, front and back view. In essence, I'm drawing instead of crafting here. And then I'll take all these pieces and then stick them together. This way I will get a 3D model that looks surprisingly compelling. I'll then bake the first layer of the furniture and then add the cushions on the couch. This is a technique that I've seen many YouTube sculptors do, where they have a harder base and then you slowly add details along the way. It almost feels like cheating, but with my skill sets, I don't see any other way other than this. For the tiny little feet on the benches, it will be impossible for me to make it using polymer clay, so I'll just stick some ABS plastics and call it a day. For the paint, I wouldn't call myself a good painter, and I'm still learning how to paint good models, and that also includes trying out different types of acrylic paints. I have yet to get my hands on those expensive paints like Citadel or Vallejo, and for now I'll use whatever I have in hand. Not only that, in this diorama I tried to give it a bit of weathering effect, which I haven't done in any of my previous dioramas. Moving on to the massive table here, I think I will make it a broken table. To do that, I'll be using basswood as my tabletop. I'll carve out the rounded edges of the tabletop and then start working on the feet. Now the feet of the table is rounded and weird, and I didn't have any basswood that was thick enough for this feet, so I'll be using balsa wood here instead. Which also means that I have to be really careful with this because balsa wood likes to snap anytime. But with great effort, or should I say less of it, I delicately sculpted the feet of the furniture. Now here I glue one of the feet as being broken, but then I realized tables don't really fall that way, so I changed it to the other side later on. After that, I'll give it a paint job that looks similar to the one in the video game. With the painting done, I'll just stick it onto the floor. Now I need to focus my attention on the centerpiece, which is the furnace. I'll apply the same idea here, building layers upon layers and baking them one at a time. Once the base has been baked, I will drill a hole, making way for the LED lights that will turn it into the fire. Once that's done, I will try to work on the upper section of the furnace. And my idea with the top section of the furnace is that the top section has been damaged and it has somehow been blown away, so we are only left with the pillars. I just thought that that was a good idea, and totally not because I couldn't make it, and certainly not because I spent several hours trying to make it and failed. Anyway, I'll give it a sloppy paint job and stick it onto the base. With that done, it's time to work on the centerpiece of the Ravenclaw Common Room, which is, well, a raven. After doing some quote-unquote research online, I have settled on a design for the raven. The raven will be perched on a rock or some sort of a boulder, and there were several versions of ravens, but I liked the one where the raven was stooping down, almost as if it's looking down on you. I'll just be patient with it, and I'll take my time creating the tiny little details as much as I can. For the feathers, I'll simply use a sculpting tool and lightly press it from the opposite direction. Now the texture of the feather is not correct, and in fact it's the opposite here, but with such a small raven, it shouldn't be that noticeable. After baking, a piece of its beak has fallen off, and now that I think about it, it looks more like a duck rather than a raven, so sorry to all the Ravenclaw fans out there. After giving it a dark blue raven color, I'll drill a hole onto the base. And this base will hold a magnet, which, as I explained earlier, the puzzles are all about gravity and magnets. I've also made this tiny little thing, which in the Harry Potter world is known as a pensieve, and it holds your memories and it wants your tears. And now comes the fun part where I get to do the vegetation. I'll start off with a layer of dead leaves, and for this one I'm using the leftover leaves that I used in my greenhouse diorama. The idea here is that I'll spread it lightly over the surface to make it look like dead leaves that I've gathered onto the furniture. Once I've got a sufficient layer of dead leaves going about, I'll apply PVA glue in certain selected areas and then glue the polyfiber vegetation mesh thing. Now, unlike my Hufflepuff diorama where I was simply placing it and then yanking it to create vines, this time I will be strategically cutting them into pieces so that I get less dangly bits flying about. Another thing is that unlike my first diorama, I'll try to make the vegetation a bit sparse because in my first diorama it made it look a bit too bushy, and actually I didn't really like it at the end. Once the bottom dark layer is completed, I will add tiny little strands of lighter green vines, which would make it look like they are younger, fresher leaves. It's a subtle touch, but it will make all the difference. For my next vegetation, I'll be using this mini sewing kit, which every household has, but no one uses it. What I need here is some threads, which I will dye in some dark green color. This essentially forms the stock for my vines. Once the green stalks have dried, I'll take this green leaf texture, which was originally meant for military dioramas. I will select each individual leaves, align them, and then stick them onto the stock. It goes without saying that this is a painful task, but give it enough time and I think the results should be worth it. After making about 4 of these, which doesn't sound like much, but is actually a lot, given the brain cells that died in the process, I'll glue them onto the diorama in a squiggly and swishing manner, if that's even a word. And in my opinion, even though there's just 4 of these, it adds such a layer of depth to the whole vegetation, and thus I feel like the hours I spent gluing those together was totally worth it. With that done, I'll start to work on the fire. To make the fire, I'll be using the cotton from this cotton swap, and this is a technique that I learned from this guy. Now sure, there's a lot of tutorials on making fake fires out there, but somehow I was drawn to his video. I mean, come on, look at that face. Going back to the fire though, it's pretty simple. Although instead of water, I'll be using isopropyl alcohol so that it dries faster. The idea is to make it wet so that I can stretch it out to make it look like a fire. Once that's dry, I'll stick it onto the LED I've threaded into the hole and then paint it with some appropriate colors. To add the effects of firewood as seen in the diorama, I'll be taking these branches. I'll be taking these dyed twigs and then snap them into appropriate sizes. After that, I'll just simply glue them onto the fire. And finally, to add some finishing touches to my diorama, I'll squiggle in some of the roots that come out of the giant vines. Now that should complete the structure, so let's go back and work on the magic wand box. The cushion for my magic wand to fall into, I will use layers of foam core boards and then build up the layers. After I get a decent shape that I'm satisfied with, I'll be using these adhesive felt papers. Now, obviously, I've bought much more than I need because that's how they sell. I'm wasting so much money in my life right now. Anyway, I'll simply cut them into shape and then stick it from one side to the other, making sure that I get every nook and cranny without keeping it taut. And just like any other wand prop that's out there on Amazon, I'll be using this transparent ribbon to make the wrapping for the magic wand. And that should be the wand box completed. To make the lid or the cover for my magic wand box, I'll be using some of the leftover crafting paper which I used to make my fake books in the previous diorama. I learned this technique of making paper covers from a YouTube channel called 𝚑𝚊𝚅𝚛𝚎, and in her video she's using it to make a square cover. Now on the surface it looks like I could use the same idea, but I had to work around with the technique a little bit to match it for a rectangular paper cover. This technique was especially good for me because I don't need to use any sort of template with it. The crafting paper itself folds into a cover. With the cover done, I will make a small incision in the middle, and this is for the locking pin for my switches to go into, and it will eventually lock the wand box in place. And to finish the whole thing off, I need to label my wand box. And for that I decided to write walnut and iron. It's not very original, I know, but that's usually what people write on their wand box. And since we're almost at the end of the diorama, here is the riddle. When silent stones in truth align, let silent wing on past entwine. While you're doing that, I'll give the wand box a bit of weathering effect using this knurled edge of my sculpting tool. I'll then use some of this white dust to give it some weathering effect. Followed up with some brown dirt effect, which I will brush over the wand box. With that done, I'll stick the dimensions of my wand onto the sides, which is 146mm long and a diameter of 8mm. And with that, the diorama is now completed. After my first Hufflepuff diorama, 165 of you subscribed to the channel, and I received so many encouraging comments for which I am deeply grateful for. I also want to thank Roy Alice 100 for the Ravenclaw suggestion. I hope that this Ravenclaw diorama turned out good enough for you. And as for all the viewers, I hope that this video gave you some sort of enjoyment for your day. If you have any suggestions on what I can attempt to craft next, please let me know down below. It can be anything, even challenging ones like Studio Ghibli, which has been one of the suggestions so far. Anyway, here's how to solve the riddle. Let silent stones in truth align. Let silent wings on past entwine. Cheesy, I know. So what can I do better? Well, the puzzle mechanism wasn't great. It's not a compelling puzzle idea, and aluminum tapes isn't exactly a good idea either. It didn't work most of the time when filming, and it created too much frictions when rotating the dials. The next thing is the vegetation. I definitely like the larger vines that I created at the end, but the smaller bushes aren't that great. Sure, it looks convincing, but I think I'll try other materials in my next diorama. And lastly, my painting skills. It still needs a lot of improvement, particularly in using an airbrush. I also tried to dabble a bit in weathering effects this time. I did learn a lot on this diorama, but there's definitely a lot to improve on. Anyway, that's that. I hope you have a good day, and cheers!